This video is a bit of a departure from the others on this channel. Robert Moog wasn't born in North Carolina, and he wasn't a musician. But you really can't argue with the fact that he had a gigantic impact on popular music. His synthesizer designs revolutionized music, making synths portable and affordable. And they've been used on tracks you know well, from everybody such as the Beatles to 9 Inch Nails. Bob Moog and his company Moog Music have a deep connection to North Carolina. Robert Arthur Moog was born in New York City in 1934. He grew up in Queens, and his father worked for Con Ed, or Consolidated Edison, the giant power company formed by inventor Thomas Edison. His father was also one of the first amateur radio operators. This wasn't your typical father and son duo that threw baseball together. The Moogs tinkered with electronics. Young Robert would play with vacuum tubes, transistors, and oscillators on the kitchen table, and at an early age he took interest in the Theremin, a strange electronic musical instrument invented in Russia that requires not touching it in order to play it. Robert built his first theremin at the age of 14. Robert attended the Manhattan School of Music in his early teens, and it was here that he learned music, and more importantly, that he learned how to talk with musicians. He graduated from the Bronx High School of Science in 1952 and went on to Queens College to study physics. A year later, he invented his own theremin design. The following year, 1954, he formed the R.A. Moog Company and sold theremins from mail-order catalogs. He later earned a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Columbia University and finally received a PhD from Cornell in 1965. At Cornell, Moog began to work with composer Herb Deutsch. Together they experimented with synthesizers. One synthesizer in those days would fill up an entire room, so practically speaking, they weren't being used by musicians. Moog realized there was great potential for sound generation in synthesizers, and in the early 1960s, he began working out ways to make them smaller and more practical. Synthesizers at the time relied on lots of vacuum tubes, which took up more space and made them difficult to maintain. While at Cornell, Moog experimented with then newly invented silicon transistors, and he began using voltage controls to which the transistors responded amazingly well. This enabled Moog to invent the voltage-controlled oscillator, which meant pitch could be adjusted by changing the voltage with the simple turn of a knob. He applied the same principle to loudness, so that volume could also be voltage-controlled, and these developments would turn out to be revolutionary. In 1964, Moog demonstrated his new synthesizer at the Audio Engineering Society convention in New York. Moog's synthesizer was much smaller than the competition and cost a fraction of what other synthesizers cost, around $10,000 compared with costs in the six figures. Plus, it could be programmed with knobs and patch cables instead of tedious punch cards like computers and other synthesizers of the day. This new synthesizer, the Modular Synth, became the cornerstone of Moog's business and had a major impact on music. Orders for the Moog 1, 2, and 3 models rolled in the late 60s. Mickey Dolenz was one of the first popular musicians to use a Moog on the Monkees' 1967 album, Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited. The Moog synthesizer was seen at the Monterey Pop Festival that year, and in 1968, a classically trained electronic music pioneer, Wendy Carlos, used a Moog synthesizer in her seminal album, Switched on Bach. Even the Beatles used it on 4 of the tracks of their classic Abbey Road album. Keith Emerson's solo at the end of Lucky Man proved that keyboardists could play with the same force and intensity and shred like rock guitarists. The real game changer came in 1970 with the invention of the Minimoog. Bob Moog had finally realized his dream of a compact, affordable synthesizer. This device gave access to musicians everywhere, and throughout the 1970s, Moogs of all types and sizes were popping up in multiple genres of music. Chick Corea popularized the Moog in the jazz fusion movement. Keith Emerson, as well as Rick Wakeman of Yes, immortalized it in progressive rock. Experimental acts like Tangerine Dream used it, and Kraftwerk made it foundational in the krautrock scene. Bob Moog was not known to be a great businessman, however, and by this time his company was faltering. In 1971, he sold the rights to his own name, and Moog Music, as it was then known, was rolled into Norland Musical Instruments in Buffalo, New York. Around this time, the Moog sounds of Wendy Carlos had attracted the attention of film director Stanley Kubrick, and Moog helped craft the futuristic sounds of A Clockwork Orange. Bob stayed on as a consultant and designer with Norland until 1977. Around the same time, Donna Summer and Giorgio Moroder got together to record one of the hottest dance tracks of the decade, I Feel Love. In 1978, Moog cashed his stock, quit his job, and moved to the mountains of North Carolina with his wife and children. He found a beautiful spot some 30 minutes northwest of Asheville called Big Briar Cove, and he built a house and engineering space there. He founded Big Briar, a new company that would continue to innovate the world of electronic music and compete with newer names like ARP and Roland. He would also serve as vice president and consultant to Kurzweil Music Systems in the late 80s, and in the early 90s, he was a research professor at the University of North Carolina at Asheville. In 2002, he was able to reacquire the rights to his name, and Big Briar became Moog Music. He continued designing late in life and even developed a touchscreen piano. In 2005, he passed away from a brain tumor. He had spent the last 27 years of his life working and living in North Carolina. Even if you didn't know the name or the instruments, you know the sound. Minimoogs have been used for bold, brassy bass lines such as Parliament's classic funk track, Flashlight. And while the 80s were chock full of various synthesizer sounds, Moog remained at the forefront. That bass line is Moog.
How does it feel to treat me like you do?
By now, you're probably recognizing those sounds and realizing that the sound of Moog instruments is everywhere in popular music.
I was mistaken. I thought I heard your words.
Stanley Kubrick brought Wendy Carlos back to work on the soundtrack to another of his masterpieces, The Shining. Carlos would also record music for the soundtrack to Tron.
Finish the game! No!
popularity of the Moog synth surged again in the 1990s. Bands like Stereolab, Portishead, Air, and 9 Inch Nails were all using Moogs to achieve new sounds. But even today, bands still seek out the sounds of the Moog synthesizer. You can hear it on tracks from The Decemberists or King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. So whether it's thumping bass lines for dance music, moody atmospheres for soundtracks, retro futuristic sounds, or soaring solos, the Moog line of instruments has proven to be revolutionary in pushing sonic boundaries. And it's important to note, Bob didn't do it all by himself. It was with talented collaborators throughout his career, from Cornell to Big Briar, and teams of hardworking engineers and designers that the Moog name became synonymous with synthesizers.
Got money, just tell me what you want me to. Got
Today, Bob's legacy is still going strong in Asheville. Moog Music continues to build and sell keyboards, synthesizers, and even Theremins from its headquarters near downtown. You can shop the store or take a tour. You can also visit the small but amazing Moogseum in the heart of downtown Asheville. Here you can not only learn about Bob and his work, but you can play instruments and experiment with sounds all you like. The Moog Foundation continues to support Bob's legacy, and if you're interested, you may want to help that effort. What are your favorite artists or tracks that use a Moog synthesizer? Leave them in the comments below. And if you like this video, please hit that like button. And if you want to see more like it, hit that subscribe as well. See you next time.